The red light on the scanner flickered, a rhythmic pulse that set the tempo for the day. Sarah moved with a precision born from 23 years of repetition. Slide the bread, catch the weight, scan. The beep was sharp, consistent, and constant. She reached for the next item without looking, her fingers finding the barcode by instinct alone. Hundreds of faces passed through her lane every shift, yet she remained a fixture, as much a part of the store as the shelves themselves. She was a ghost in the machine of the checkout aisle, performing her duties with a mechanical grace that rendered her invisible to the rush of shoppers. The scanner beeped again. A box of cereal, a gallon of juice, a bag of produce. Her hands moved in a fluid, unending cycle. She did not look up, nor did she falter. The line shifted, the belt groaned under the weight of groceries, and the red light continued its steady, hypnotic rhythm. She was the anchor in a sea of transactions, a silent witness to the daily pace of the world, defined entirely by the work that happened between the beeps. The rhythm of the scanner faded, replaced by the silence of a kitchen table 6 years ago. Sarah sat in the dim light, a single envelope resting on the wood. She pulled out the cash. It was thin. She spread the bills across the table, counting them twice, then 3 times, as if the number might change if she looked hard enough. It did not. Rent was due on Tuesday. The electric bill was already 3 days past its deadline. She pushed the money into separate piles, but there was nothing left for the third pile. The air in the room felt heavy, stagnant. She tapped the edge of the envelope against the table, a nervous, uneven sound that replaced the steady beep of the register. Every dollar was accounted for, yet the total remained insufficient. She rubbed her palms against the rough grain of the table, staring at the empty space where the grocery money should have been. The weight of the impending week pressed down on her shoulders. There were no margins for error, no room for a mistake. Just the cold, hard math of survival that demanded more than she had to give. The break room was a cramped box of gray walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Sarah sat on a plastic crate in the corner, her fingers tracing the rim of a lukewarm coffee cup. The hum of the vending machine was the only sound until the door clicked open. 2 customers from the store walked in, talking over the noise of the machinery. Sarah kept her head down, trying to disappear into the shadows. "Wealth isn't about what you earn," the first one said, his voice cutting through the hum. "It is about what you keep." Sarah froze. The spoon in her hand clattered against the plastic crate, landing on the floor. She did not reach for it. The sentence hung in the stagnant air, vibrating with a meaning she had never considered. She had spent years chasing the number on her paycheck, believing that more money was the only way to silence the bills. Now, the logic shifted. If the secret was not in the earning, then her lack of a windfall did not mean she was trapped. She looked at the abandoned spoon on the floor, then back at the door where the voices had faded. A new path opened in her mind, quiet and steady, promising a way out of the math that had defined her life. The public library was a sanctuary of dust and quiet. Sarah walked the aisles, her fingers brushing against spines of books until she found the section on finance. She pulled a worn copy of Napoleon Hill from the shelf. The pages were soft, yellowed at the edges. She sat at a wooden table and read for an hour, the concept of consistency repeating in her mind like a heartbeat. It was not about a sudden stroke of luck. It was about the slow, relentless accumulation of small parts. She checked the book out and walked home, the weight of the paper in her hand feeling different than the weight of her bills. That Friday, she sat at her kitchen table. She pulled a $5 bill from her wallet. It was creased, thin, and represented a meal she would now skip. She stared at it. Then, she placed the bill into a separate, empty envelope. She folded the flap down. The action was small, almost silent, yet it felt like a rupture in the cycle that had trapped her for years. She hid the envelope behind a stack of plates. It was the first brick in a wall she had not yet learned how to build, but she had started. The $5 habit became a monthly rhythm. Sarah opened a dedicated account, the process as mechanical as scanning groceries. She bypassed the high-risk, high-reward promises that flickered on the morning news. Instead, she chose index funds. They were dull. They were slow. They were exactly what she needed. Her lunch breaks transformed into a series of calculated subtractions. She stopped buying the pre-made sandwiches from the deli. She brought bread and cheese from home, packing the meal in a plastic container the night before. Each time she saved the cost of a store-bought lunch, she mentally converted the price into a fraction of a share. $5 became 10. 10 became 20. The physical sensation of hunger was now a signal of growth rather than a symptom of poverty. She stopped looking at the balance daily. She stopped checking for immediate results. She simply deposited the money, hit the confirmation button, and returned to the register. The world around her remained loud and chaotic, but her own financial life narrowed down to a single repetitive motion. She was building a machine out of her own discipline, one small, invisible transaction at a time. The news broke on a Tuesday. The markets took a sudden, sharp dive, and the store atmosphere shifted instantly. Employees gathered around the small break room television, their faces illuminated by the red flickering of falling stock tickers. Comments flew like sparks. Panic was a fever, spreading from the registers to the aisles. People spoke of lost savings and impending ruin. Sarah watched them for a moment, observing the wide eyes and the frantic gestures. She did not look at the screen. She did not ask about the percentage of the loss. She turned away, walked to the bank, and pulled out her latest contribution. The teller looked at her with a furrowed brow, glancing toward the news reports on the wall. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her hands steady as she filled out the deposit slip. She moved with the same precision she used to scan a customer's groceries. While her co-workers huddled to discuss the volatility, she pushed her money into the index funds. It was not a grand gesture. It was a quiet, deliberate rejection of the fear that had gripped the room. She walked back to her station, picked up her scanner, and began her shift, entirely unmoved by the chaos that others believed was the end of the world. The years began to fold into one another. Seasons changed outside the glass front doors, but inside, the scanner's pulse remained constant. Sarah's feet grew calloused, and the ache in her lower back became a familiar shadow at the end of every shift. She kept her pace. She kept her focus. 20 years passed, then 23. The world outside rushed forward, but she stayed at the register, a steady anchor in a stream of shifting faces. Every deposit was a brick in a wall that no one else could see. The small, automated transfers triggered by her paycheck hummed along, independent of her daily fatigue. She felt the weight of the years in her joints, yet she monitored the growth of her account with a detached, clinical precision. The numbers shifted from thousands into tens of thousands. Then, the threshold moved again. She watched the compounding interest accelerate, the curve of her wealth steepening while her own body slowed down. The monotony of the checkout line became the engine of her freedom. She was no longer just scanning groceries. She was harvesting the results of 2 decades of discipline. The final push arrived on a Tuesday, the total hitting a figure she once thought impossible. She held the scanner, looked at the long line of customers, and felt the quiet, heavy stillness of a marathon finally nearing its end. The shift finally ended. Sarah stepped into her kitchen, the air cool and still compared to the frantic noise of the store. She set her keys on the counter, the metal striking the wood with a sharp, lonely click. She moved to the small desk in the corner and opened her laptop. The screen glowed, casting a pale light across the room. She navigated to the bank portal, her fingers moving with the same steady rhythm she used at the register. She entered the password. A loading icon spun a small circle of patience. Then, the page refreshed. The cursor hovered over the total balance, 1 million. The number sat there, plain and unadorned. There was no chime, no celebratory animation, no sudden flash of lightning to mark the shift in her reality. The silence of the kitchen amplified the weight of those 7 digits. She leaned back, the chair groaning under her weight. She stared at the screen, visualizing each individual deposit, every missed lunch, every automated transfer made during the last 2 decades. It was a mountain built from pebbles. She realized then that there was no singular moment of triumph, only the quiet, unrelenting sum of thousands of small, disciplined decisions. The number was not an end, but a mirror reflecting the life she had forged in the margins of her everyday work. The sun was barely up when Sarah unlocked the store doors. The air inside smelled of floor wax and cold produce. She walked to her station, the familiar weight of the scanner sitting heavy in her hand. 7 o'clock. The first customer arrived, a man with a basket of bread and coffee. She processed the items, the scanner beeping with a sharp, rhythmic precision that echoed through the empty aisles. The store hummed to life around her. A young cashier, barely out of school, moved to the neighboring register. The girl watched Sarah work, her eyes darting between the screen and the steady movement of Sarah's hands. The girl leaned over the gap between registers, her voice low. "Sarah, I have been watching you for months. You never seem stressed, even when the lines are out the door. What is the secret to getting ahead in a place like this?" Sarah paused. The store was quiet for a brief heartbeat. She looked at the scanner, then back at the girl. The distance between the $1 million in her account and the simple task of scanning a loaf of bread felt like a bridge she had built one day at a time. The girl waited, expecting a tip on savings or a shortcut to success. Sarah stood there, grounded in the reality of the morning, ready to speak. Sarah looked at the girl, her expression unreadable. "I never stopped," she said. The words were quiet, devoid of grandiosity, yet they carried the weight of 23 years. She reached out and grabbed a carton of milk from the belt. The plastic felt cold against her palm. She passed it over the red light. The machine beeped, a sharp and familiar sound that cut through the morning air. That single note confirmed the transaction, just as it had thousands of times before. She slid the carton into a bag and looked back at the girl, who blinked, waiting for something more profound. But there was nothing else to say. Sarah understood that the money was merely a tool, a byproduct of the real goal. The true masterpiece was not the balance on a screen, but the life of absolute discipline she had constructed. Day by agonizingly small day, she turned back to the conveyor belt, grabbed the next item, and scanned it. The rhythm resumed. The store was busy, the work was constant, and she was exactly where she had chosen to be. She was a millionaire, and she was still at work, finding peace in the steady, unbroken cycle of her own making.